The glass shattered on the vineyard's stone patio, red wine pooling like blood under the golden Napa Valley sun. Elliot froze, his heart hammering, as every head turned toward him except one. Javier, the man with the easy smile and eyes like molten amber, didn't flinch. He just knelt to gather the shards, his calm cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. Elliot had never been good with crowds. At 32, he'd built a quiet life in Seattle, running a small bookstore that smelled of old pages and coffee. Social events were a rare torture, but his sister, Clara, had insisted he join her at this exclusive wine tasting in Napa. Live a little, she'd said, dragging him from his safe, solitary world. He'd agreed, expecting nothing more than a weekend of forced smiles and awkward small talk. But now, standing in the wreckage of his own clumsiness, he felt exposed, raw, like a nerve under a spotlight. Javier stood, brushing his hands on his tailored navy blazer, and handed Elliot a fresh glass of Pinot Noir. "No harm done," he said, his voice low and warm, like a melody you didn't know you'd been waiting to hear. Up close, Javier was striking broad shoulders, a faint scar above his left eyebrow, and a confidence that made Elliot's chest tighten. Their fingers brushed as Elliot took the glass, and a jolt ran through him, sharp and unfamiliar. "You okay?" Javier asked, his gaze steady, searching. Elliot nodded, though his throat felt dry, words caught somewhere between panic and something else, something that felt like falling. The tasting continued, the crowd buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses. But Elliot's world had narrowed to Javier. He learned Javier was a chef, born in Miami to Cuban parents, now running a fusion restaurant in San Francisco that blended bold flavors with quiet elegance. "Food is love," Javier said, swirling his wine. "You feed someone, you're telling them a story." Elliot, usually tongue-tied, found himself talking about his bookstore, his love for poetry, the way words could hold a heart together when nothing else could. Javier listened, really listened, his eyes never leaving Elliot's face. By the time the sun dipped below the vineyard's rolling hills, they drifted to a quiet corner of the patio, the air thick with the scent of grapes and possibility. Clara shot Elliot a knowing grin from across the crowd, but he barely noticed. Javier leaned closer, his breath warm against Elliot's ear. "You ever feel like you've known someone forever, even when you just met?" Elliot's pulse raced. He wasn't ready for this, for the way Javier's words cracked open something he'd kept locked away. He'd spent years dodging feelings like these, telling himself he didn't need them, that love was a story for other people. But Javier's presence was a challenge, a spark in the dark. "I don't usually do this," Elliot said, voice barely above a whisper. "Talk to strangers. Feel this." Javier's smile softened, but his eyes burned with intensity. "Then let's not be strangers." They stayed until the stars came out, sharing stories of their lives. Javier's chaotic childhood in Miami, filled with music and spice. Elliot's quiet one in Seattle, where books were his only real friends. When Javier reached for Elliot's hand, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. But as their fingers intertwined, a shadow passed over Elliot's heart. He'd been here before, not in Napa, not with Javier, but in moments where hope collided with fear. The night ended too soon. Javier had to leave for a late shift at his restaurant, but not before slipping his number into Elliot's phone. "Come to the city tomorrow," he said, his voice a mix of command and plea. "I'll cook for you." Elliot watched him go, the vineyard suddenly too quiet, too empty. He clutched the phone, Javier's number glowing like a promise or a warning. The next morning, Elliot woke in his hotel room, his mind a tangle of doubt and desire. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, ever since his first love, Michael. had left him shattered at 25. Michael had been vibrant, reckless, promising forever until he walked away without a word. Elliot had sworn never to let anyone in again. But Javier was different, or was he? Clara found him staring at his phone. Javier's text, "See you tonight." Still unanswered. "You're overthinking this," she said, tossing a pillow at him. "Go live. Stop hiding." Elliot wanted to argue, to retreat to his safe, predictable life. But the memory of Javier's touch, his voice, pulled him like a tide. By evening, he was on a train to San Francisco, the city lights blurring past like his own racing thoughts. Javier's restaurant, Sabor y Alma, was a warm, intimate space tucked into the Mission District. The walls were lined with vibrant murals, and the air carried the scent of saffron and roasted peppers. Javier greeted him at the door, his apron dusted with flour, his smile brighter than the city skyline. "You came," he said, as if he'd been holding his breath. He led Elliot to a small table in the back, away from the bustle of the dinner rush. The meal was a revelation, each dish a story, as Javier had promised. A ceviche that danced with citrus and heat. A slow-roasted pork with notes of cumin and memory. Between bites, they talked, their words weaving a fragile bridge between them. Javier spoke of his dreams to open more restaurants, to share his culture with the world. Elliot admitted his own quiet ambition to write poetry, to capture the ache and beauty of being alive. As the night deepened, Javier took Elliot to the kitchen, now empty, the staff gone home. He poured 2 glasses of wine, the same Pinot Noir from the tasting. "To new beginnings," he toasted, his eyes locked on Elliot's. Elliot's heart pounded. He wanted to believe in this, in Javier, but fear clung to him like damp air. "What if this is a mistake?" he asked, his voice trembling. Javier set his glass down, stepped closer. "What if it's not?" And then he kissed him. The world stopped. Javier's lips were soft, urgent, tasting of wine and something deeper, something that felt like home. Elliot melted into it, his fears dissolving in the warmth of Javier's touch. When they pulled apart, breathless, Javier's forehead rested against his. "I've been wanting to do that since you broke that glass," he murmured. Elliot laughed, the sound raw and real. For the first time in years, he felt alive. But as they stood there, wrapped in the quiet of the kitchen, a shadow lingered. Elliot knew this feeling too bright, too fragile. He'd fallen before, and the crash had nearly broken him. Would Javier be different? Or was this just another story destined to end? The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments. Elliot found himself driving to San Francisco every weekend, each trip a surrender to the pull of Javier's gravity. They explored the city together, wandering through the fog-kissed streets of the Castro, sharing tacos at a late-night food truck, laughing over bad karaoke in a dimly lit bar. Javier's world was loud, vibrant, full of flavor and life. And Elliot, who'd spent so long in grayscale, felt himself coming alive in colors he'd forgotten existed. But with every touch, every kiss, came a whisper of doubt. Elliot couldn't shake the memory of Michael's betrayal, how love had felt like a promise until it wasn't. Javier was different, he told himself. Javier was open, honest, his heart laid bare in every dish he cooked, every story he shared. Yet fear was a stubborn guest, lingering in the corners of Elliot's mind. One night, at Javier's apartment, they lay tangled in sheets, the city's hum a soft backdrop. Javier traced lazy circles on Elliot's back, his voice low. "You're holding something back," he said, not accusing, just observing. "What is it?" Elliot's chest tightened. He wanted to spill everything: the hurt, the walls, the fear of being broken again. But the word stuck. Instead, he kissed Javier, hoping the act could say what he couldn't. Javier didn't push, but his eyes held a quiet question, one Elliot wasn't ready to answer. Their relationship grew, fragile but fierce. Javier invited Elliot to a family dinner at his parents' home in Oakland, a sprawling affair filled with cousins, aunts, and the rich aroma of arroz con pollo. Elliot, nervous and out of place, was welcomed like he'd always belonged. Javier's mother, Rosa, hugged him tightly, her eyes twinkling. "You make my boy smile," she whispered. "That's enough for me." Elliot wanted to believe it was enough for him, too. But the weight of his past pressed harder. He started noticing things: Javier's late nights at the restaurant, the way his phone buzzed with messages he didn't always answer. Small things, but they fed the doubt Elliot couldn't shake. Was Javier too good to be true? Was this love, or just another illusion? One evening, at a gallery opening Javier had insisted they attend, the tension broke. The event was crowded, the air thick with pretension and perfume. Elliot, already on edge, watched Javier charm a group of investors. His laughter easy, his charisma magnetic. A man in a sharp suit lingered too long, his hand resting on Javier's arm. Elliot's stomach twisted, memories of Michael's flirtations flooding back. He slipped outside, the cool night air a shock against his burning skin. Javier found him moments later, concern etched across his face. "What's wrong?" Elliot's words came out sharp, unguarded. "You're always so easy with people. How do I know I'm not just another flavor of the week?" Javier's face fell, hurt flashing in his eyes. "You think that's what this is?" he asked, voice low. "Elliot, I'm here. I'm all in. But you've got one foot out the door." The truth stung. Elliot wanted to argue, to blame Javier, but he couldn't. Javier was holding back, guarding his heart like a fortress. "I'm scared," he admitted finally, his voice breaking. "The last time I let someone in, they tore me apart." Javier stepped closer, his hand finding Elliot's. "I'm not him," he said fiercely. "But you've got to let me prove it." They stood there, the city pulsing around them, and Elliot felt the weight of a choice. He could keep running from the past, or he could take a chance on the man standing in front of him, the man whose kiss tasted like hope. "I'll try," Elliot whispered. Javier's smile was small but real. "That's all I'm asking." Trying wasn't easy. Elliot returned to Seattle, his bookstore a quiet refuge from the intensity of Javier's world. But distance only sharpened his longing. They texted constantly, Javier sending pictures of new dishes, Elliot sharing lines of poetry that made his heart ache. Late-night calls stretched into hours, their voices weaving a fragile thread across the miles. Yet doubt lingered. Elliot's mind played tricks, conjuring scenarios where Javier grew bored, where the spark faded. He hated himself for it, but the fear was a reflex, carved deep by years of guarding his heart. One weekend, Javier surprised him, showing up at the bookstore with a bottle of wine and a grin. "Thought I'd bring Napa to you," he said, pulling Elliot into a kiss that tasted like summer. They spent the day rearranging shelves, Javier teasing Elliot about his alphabetized chaos, their laughter filling the empty store. That night, over wine and takeout, Javier asked about Michael. Elliot hesitated, the name a wound he rarely touched. But Javier's steady gaze pulled the story out: how Michael had been his first everything, how his promises had unraveled into silence, leaving Elliot to pick up the pieces alone. Javier listened, his hand warm on Elliot's. "He didn't deserve you," he said simply. But I'm glad he's gone. Means I get to be here. Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to believe Javier, to let go of the past. But it wasn't that simple. What if I'm not enough? He asked, voice barely audible. Javier's eyes softened. You're more than enough. You're everything. The words were a balm, but they didn't erase the fear. Over the next weeks, their relationship deepened, but so did the stakes. Javier started talking about the future trips they could take, a life they could build. Elliot wanted it, craved it, but every step forward felt like a step toward a cliff. Then came the fight. It was a small Tina missed call, a rescheduled visit, but it snowballed. Elliot, stressed from a slow month at the bookstore, snapped when Javier mentioned a new investor pushing for a second restaurant location. You're always chasing the next big thing, Elliot said, his voice sharp. What happens to us when you're too busy for me? Javier's face hardened. You think I'd choose work over you? I'm building something, Elliot, for us. But you're so busy waiting for me to fail you. You're not even here. The words cut deep. Elliot wanted to fight back, but Javier's accusation echoed his own fears. Was he sabotaging this before it could even begin? They didn't speak for 3 days. The silence was unbearable, each hour a reminder of how much Javier had become part of his life. On the 4th day, Elliot drove to San Francisco, his heart in his throat. He found Javier at the restaurant, prepping for the dinner rush. I'm sorry, Elliot said, the words spilling out. I'm scared, but I don't want to lose you. Javier set down his knife, his expression softening. You won't lose me. But you've got to trust me, Elliot. Trust us. They kissed, the kitchen fading away, and for a moment, Elliot believed they could make it. But the world wasn't done testing them. Life settled into a rhythm, fragile but sweet. Elliot spent more time in San Francisco, helping Javier with small tasks at the restaurant, learning to chop onions without crying, laughing when Javier teased him about his clumsy knife skills. Javier visited Seattle, curling up with Elliot in the bookstore's back room, reading poetry aloud while rain tapped the windows. But the world outside their bubble wasn't always kind. One night, walking hand in hand through the Castro, they passed a group of men who muttered slurs under their breath. Javier's grip tightened, his jaw set, but Elliot felt the sting deep in his chest. He'd faced this before, hate dressed up as whispers, glances, or worse. In Seattle, he'd learned to shrink, to hide. But Javier didn't shrink. He stopped, turned, and stared the men down until they looked away. You okay? Javier asked later, his voice soft. Elliot nodded, but the encounter lingered, a reminder of the world's sharp edges. He wondered if Javier, so bold and unapologetic, could ever understand the quiet fear that lived in him. Then came the letter. It arrived at the bookstore, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, faggots don't belong here. The words were a punch, stealing Elliot's breath. He didn't tell Javier, didn't want to burden him. But the letter festered, feeding his doubts. Was this a sign? Was the universe warning him to pull back before he got hurt again? He started pulling away. Small things at first, shorter calls, fewer visits. Javier noticed, his texts growing more urgent. Talk to me, Elliot. What's going on? Elliot couldn't bring himself to answer. The letter had cracked something open, letting old fears flood in. He loved Javier God. He loved him, but love had burned him before. What if this was just another fire waiting to consume him? One night, Javier showed up at the bookstore, unannounced, his eyes blazing. You're shutting me out, he said, his voice raw. I deserve to know why. Elliot's resolve crumbled. He showed Javier the letter, his hands shaking. Javier read it, his face darkening, and for a moment, Elliot feared he'd pull away, too. But Javier crumpled the paper and pulled Elliot into his arms. This isn't about us, he said fiercely. This is their hate, not our truth. Elliot clung to him, tears burning his eyes. I'm scared, he admitted. Not just of this. Of everything. Of losing you. Javier cupped his face, his touch steady. You're not losing me. Not now. Not ever. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, until the bookstore's quiet felt like a sanctuary again. But the letter was a shadow, a reminder that love, no matter how bright, could be tested by the world's darkness. The letter wasn't the end. More came, each one uglier than the last, slipped under the bookstore's door or mailed anonymously. Elliot stopped opening them, but their weight pressed on him, a constant reminder of the world's judgment. He didn't tell Javier about the new ones, didn't want to see the pain in his eyes again. But secrets have a way of festering, and Javier sensed the shift. One evening, at Javier's restaurant, Elliot's silence broke. A customer, emboldened by too much wine, made a crude comment about people like them as they shared a quiet moment at the bar. Javier's staff handled it swiftly, escorting the man out, but the damage was done. Elliot's hands trembled as he set down his glass. Why does it feel like the world's against us? He asked, his voice barely audible. Javier's jaw tightened. The world's not against us. It's just loud. We're louder. But Elliot wasn't so sure. He started spending more time in Seattle, claiming the bookstore needed him. Javier didn't argue, but his texts grew shorter, his calls less frequent. The distance between them wasn't just miles, it was a growing chasm, filled with unspoken fears. Clara noticed first. You're pushing him away, she said one night, her voice sharp with frustration. He's not Michael. Stop punishing him for someone else's mistakes. Elliot wanted to argue, but the truth stung. He was running, not from Javier, but from the vulnerability of loving him. The letters, the slurs, the world's hate, they were excuses, shields for his own fear. He drove to San Francisco that night, the road blurring through tears. He found Javier in the restaurant's kitchen, alone, prepping for the next day. I'm sorry, Elliot said, his voice breaking. I'm scared, but I love you. I don't want to lose this. Javier set down his knife, his eyes searching Elliot's. You love me? He asked, a smile tugging at his lips. Elliot nodded, his heart pounding. More than anything. Javier crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling Elliot into a kiss that tasted like forgiveness, like home. I love you, too, he whispered. But we've got to fight for this. Together. They made a plan, no more secrets, no more running. They'd face the hate, the letters, the world, as a team. But the world wasn't done with them yet. The decision to fight together changed everything. Elliot moved to San Francisco, leasing out his bookstore to a friend. He found a job at a local library, surrounded by books but closer to Javier. They built a life messy, imperfect, but theirs. Javier's restaurant thrived, and Elliot started writing again, poetry spilling from him like a long-held breath. But the letters didn't stop. They escalated, arriving with photos, now blurry shots of Elliot and Javier together, taken from a distance. Someone was watching them. Javier wanted to go to the police, but Elliot hesitated, afraid of drawing more attention. What if it makes it worse? He asked. Javier's eyes flashed. We're not hiding. Not anymore. They hired a private investigator, a quiet woman named Lena who specialized in harassment cases. She traced the letters to a local man, a former customer banned from Javier's restaurant for drunken outbursts. The news brought relief, but also a new fear. Confronting hate head-on was different from enduring it in silence. Lena arranged a meeting with the man, supervised by a lawyer. Elliot didn't want to go, but Javier insisted. "We face this together," he said. The meeting was tense, the man's anger palpable but restrained. He spat apologies, claiming he'd meant no harm, but his eyes told a different story. Lena ensured a restraining order was filed, and the letters stopped. But the experience left scars, a reminder of how fragile their peace was. Through it all, Javier was a rock. He cooked for Elliot on bad days, filling their small apartment with the scent of comfort. They danced to salsa in the living room, laughed over burnt attempts at breakfast, made love under the glow of city lights. Each moment was a brick, building something stronger than fear. One night, Javier took Elliot to the vineyard where they'd met, now quiet under a blanket of stars. "This is where it started," he said, his voice soft. "I knew, even then, you were it for me." Elliot's heart swelled. For the first time, he believed it, too. A year later, the vineyard was alive again, this time for a wedding. Not theirs not yet, but Clara's, her joy radiant as she danced with her new husband under fairy lights. Elliot and Javier stood at the edge of the celebration, hands entwined, watching the scene unfold. The past year hadn't been easy. The restraining order held, but the world still threw challenges, disapproving glances, whispered judgments, the occasional customer who walked out of Javier's restaurant when they saw them together. But they faced it all, side by side. Elliot's poetry was published, a small collection that bared his heart to the world. Javier opened a second restaurant, naming a dish after Elliot, a spicy, sweet ceviche that told their story. As the band played a slow song, Javier pulled Elliot onto the dance floor. "You ever think about this?" he asked, his voice low. "Us. Forever." Elliot's breath caught. He'd spent so long running from forever, afraid it would break him. But with Javier, forever felt like a promise he could keep. "Every day?" he admitted. Javier grinned, pulling him closer. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere." They danced, the world fading to just them, the vineyard, and the stars. Later, as guests toasted to love and new beginnings, Javier led Elliot to a quiet corner. He dropped to one knee, a simple silver ring glinting in his hand. "Elliot," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "I want every day with you. The good, the hard, all of it. Marry me." Tears blurred Elliot's vision, but for once, they weren't from fear. They were from joy, from the certainty that this was right. "Yes," he whispered, pulling Javier up into a kiss that tasted like wine, like love, like home. The crowd cheered, Clara loudest of all, as they embraced under the Napa sky. The world wasn't perfect, but their love was. It was fierce, hard-won, and theirs. And as they stood together, Elliot knew he'd never stop going back for that kiss, for that man, for that life. The end.